Hello everyone from Bosnia and Herzegovina and welcome to our presentation. My name is Anita Dedic and I will present you about the periphytic diatoms in landlocked and Karstic springs in Bosnia and Herzegovina. And before I start, let me introduce myself and also my team. I'm here on the first picture, Associate Professor from University of Mostar, freshwater ecologist, algologist, external expert for LIMCO International. The second author is Dr. Almut Gerhardt. She is Director of LIMCO International Germany, ecotoxicologist, expert for macroinvertebrate. Here on screen you can see the link for LIMCO International, and there you can find more information about services and activities which we do. The third author is Dr. Sophia Barinova. She is a geologist from University of Haifa from Israel. I suppose that some of you there in Michigan never heard for Bosnia and Herzegovina, and here on screen you can see where we are. One small country on the Balkan Peninsula of southeastern Europe. As I said, one small country, but very rich in biological and habitat diversity. From one side we have mountain springs and stream, karstic and thermal springs, karstic rivers and lake, artificial and natural lake, and from other side Adriatic Sea. Grateful to different habitats, we are very rich in biodiversity, and I can say that we are hots for biodiversity. How we are diverse, you can see also on these pictures. Northern and southern part of my country diverse each other in view of geology, geomorphology, hydrology, hydrographically, etc. Northern and southern part of my country are completely differ each other. The surface water on the northern part of my country belongs to the river basin of the Black Sea, and the surface water on the southern part of country belongs to the river basin of Adriatic Sea. This area in red is a typically karstic area with a lot of sinkholes and waterfalls and with a lot of underground water. And all our springs are in this area in red. Our springs are very close each other in view of geography and how they look. You can see on these pictures. All our springs are limestone type of springs. It is the most common type of springs here in karstic area. As you can see on these pictures, all our springs are in natural state. It is not so usual for springs here in the Balkan area, and I have to say that in the Balkan, springs are mainly perceived from an economic and hydrological point of view as sources of pure drinking water. And this has resulted that most springs become captured for the purpose of water supply, but often also and for aesthetic reason. In the area of northern part of my country, almost 40% of springs are heavily modified. As you can see, the springs here in the southern part of country are not in the same situation until now. In view of previous research of algae in Bosnia and Herzegovina, I can say that algae didn't get enough attention. Until now, diatoms are the most dominant and the most studied group of algae here. Other group of algae have been poorly investigated. We have a lot of published paper about karstic springs from Bosnia and Herzegovina, but most papers deal with faunistical and ecological research of some taxa, not with entire communities living in springs habitat. A few months ago we published one chapter about springs from Bosnia and Herzegovina, and there you can see all information about all previous biological research in karstic springs in Bosnia and Herzegovina. In the Bosnia and Herzegovina and also in all the Dinaric region, the springs have been mostly investigated also in the selected area. For example, in the northern part of my country, ecological studies were related to the riparian spring, bordering streams and rivers which are under strong influence of flooding event, and therefore they are more sensitive to the climate change. From one side we have some types of springs with a lot of scientific data, but from other side, for example for mountain springs, we are without scientific data, and mountain springs and also all small water bodies from mountain area have been poorly investigated here in the Balkan country and also in the Bosnia and Herzegovina. What we done for purpose of this presentation? We collected samples from natural substrate and also from artificial substrates from 9 karstic springs here, but we will present you just information about natural substrates. We collected samples applying European standards, procedure and protocol, and for identification and determination of taxa we used the microscope, DIC, different guides and keys, and also for presentation of our results we use different statistical program, for example primer, past, and also for calculating diatom indices we used Omnidia, and protocol for Croatian waters for calculating trophic index. In the same moment, with the collection diatom samples, we collect samples for nutrient analysis and also measured physical and chemical conditions in all our springs. According to physical and chemical conditions, all our springs were very similar. So we just confirmed that springs are very stable biotopes. All our springs have low temperature oscillation, good aeration, and generally oligotrophic conditions. I have to say that a lot of our springs here have very high value of conductivity. And here on this cluster you can see that our springs separate in the 2 different groups. The first group are springs which have conductivity more than 2000 microsiemens. It is not unusual for karstic area because we have geological base made from gypsum and anhydrate. In general, springs are very similar in view on physical and chemical conditions, and only difference is in value of conductivity. We expected that conductivity will influence on diatom communities, but it's not happened. In view of number of taxa in the springs, we determined 113 taxa. In comparison with artificial substrate, we determined in natural substrate 15 taxa more. And we know that in the case that we monitored colonization process a longer period, that the result will be absolutely the same. As I said, we expected that conductivity will impact on the structure of diatom community, but it has not been established. According to CEP analysis, the influence on physical and chemical conditions on the diatoms has not been established. According to NMDS original diagram, in view of abundancy and structure of diatoms taxa, our springs are very similar. We get one group with 3 subgroups, but all very similar in view of taxa. The most common genera in springs were Gomphonemma, Navicula, Cimbella, and Nichia. And in view of the most common taxa, I have to say that before we start with research, we expected some rare, endemic, specific taxa, but unfortunately we determined widespread and cosmopolitan taxa in springs. What's happened there? What is the reason for that? There it could be more reason for that. Maybe some of them can be that our springs are not typically springs. Maybe they are just a sinkhole of rivers. It is very common for karstic area, but we don't have scientific confirmation for that in this moment. Other reason can be different anthropogenic impacts on the diversity in springs and also climate changes. Almut and me compared our results for karstic springs from Bosnia and Herzegovina with the springs in Constance area in Germany, and actually we get very similar results. And in the springs in the Constance area we determined a lot of widespread and cosmopolitan taxa, and we can say that something happened in all our springs, not just in the Balkan area. Then happened something on the wider level. For assessment of the ecological status in springs, we calculated all diatom indices from Omnidia and also Croatian diatom index, but according to all of them we get that our springs are eutrophic. We know that they are not eutrophic, but our indices show that they are. Orthophosphate and physical and chemical conditions give us that springs are oligotrophic, but according to indices they are not. Between physical and chemical conditions and also between orthophosphate and indices we didn't get any statistically significant. Here also you can see our results, and according to physical and chemical and according to phosphate values they are oligotrophic, but diatom indices and trophic diatom index show that they are eutrophic. The problem is not with springs, the problem is not with indices, the only problem is that diatom indices are not applicable for springs in general and also for conditions in the karstic springs here. And therefore we can recommend the development of a new index for the springs area in general and also for the conditions in the karstic springs here on the Dinaric area. We have stable biotopes in springs, which are very diverse in diatom taxa, but I have to say that springs here in the Balkan area very rich in biodiversity in general, and we have to put more focus on protection and preservation of karstic springs because they would give us more specific rare and endemic species. A lot of faunistical studies emphasize rich communities with a large number of endemic, rare and endangered species that inhabits in the springs of the Dinaric karst. And that have to be reason that we put more focus on the protection and preservation these. The first step toward protection of springs habitat is the quality of data used for assessing ecological status. Unfortunately, here in Bosnia and Herzegovina and also in the other Western Balkan country, we are without quality of databases. The first step for us is the hardest step for us, but we know after the first step we can do other activities. The similar problem is not just for springs. The similar problem we have and also for all small water bodies, because from one side we have springs and small water bodies with a lot of scientific data, but from other side we have these habitats without any scientific data, and we know that springs of the Dinaric karst would be a challenge for monitoring programs and also for water framework directive monitoring. We have to put more focus and more efforts on the springs and the small water bodies, because they are likely to deliver improvements in the quality of surface water more rapidly and cost effectively. As I said, the first step for us is the hardest step, and after the first step we can start with other activities, with develop new index, with intercalibration process, with evaluate an integrated environmental tool for ecological status of springs at regional and possibly at global level. The springs are not included in the standard assessment tool developed by Water Framework Directive. And here, according to our legislation in Bosnia and Herzegovina, as well as all Western Balkan countries, springs are recognized as a water resource but not as a habitat. We know that we have to put more focus on their protection and their importance. And we think that ecological studies done on springs here on the Dinaric karst has the potential to help in developing appropriate assessment tool for these habitats according to requirements of directive on the need to evaluate anthropogenic impact on the ecological status of all water bodies. And the first step for all of us have to be to nucleate an interdisciplinary group of researchers and stakeholders across discipline to assess the potential for springs to deliver widespread benefits and identify management approaches for springs to rapidly deliver large-scale improvements in water quality, safeguard ecosystem services delivery, and biodiversity protection. We all together have to put more focus and efforts on the protection from one side and sustainability using of springs habitats. It has to be our common aim for all of us in Michigan, in physically, in virtual, and also for us from developing country. We can't do a lot of alone, but we together can do a lot of it. Should be our main aim after today's activities and other meetings in Michigan. And with this, I will finish with our presentation. And thank you for your attention. Thank you, organizer, for organization of Michigan meetings. Thank you, Marco, for inviting me to be a part of groups. And also kind regards from Bosnia and Herzegovina, and welcome to my country and visit our pristine environment. Thank you.